I've never done an upload about the whole story with the Sands. I just realized it actually started with, I mean, I guess I can't really call it maybe it's I guess it is a war. It started with a war. And me and the Sams started out as enemies. And I thought that the Sams were actually Charles, the Illuminati. I thought they were human and that they had hacked into my computer and were sending me coded messages and stuff like that. And actually, it was the aliens. But I didn't know they were aliens. I thought they were humans. And for a while, I thought they were humans that had just usurped passive, inert, well, not inert, but passive alien technology that they just happened to have found because they were at the top. And I had that going on in my head for a while. And then eventually I learned just by interacting with them over long periods of time and in a lot of different places that their power, their control, I guess I'd say their power is ubiquitous. Even gnats are, even the trajectory of raindrops, I believe they control the weather also. Not control, but have power over the weather. So what that means is the difference between power and control is the power that they have is not abused to the point where they don't give any options to a system, regardless of if it's a weather system or if it's something else. But they also have very fast, not only predictive capabilities, but also tracking capabilities so that they can track the trajectory and predict the trajectory of a raindrop. And they can line that up and synchronize that with whatever thoughts that I happen to be thinking so that it all aligns. And I would imagine that considering the simplicity of a raindrop and the, trajectory of wind flows and stuff like that, that they probably don't directly control the weather, but they do, I think, nudge it. And they nudge people, and that's their powers, the nudge. And what that nudge is it's not a shove. It's not like they're forcing you into a particular position. It's not mechanical like that. It's open, but it's also, I guess it's a soft push in a particular direction. And if the mass or the inertia of the system is less than the push, then the push wins over it and it gets nudged in that direction. Not necessarily shoved, but nudged. And so if an animal, for example, or really any system that doesn't have control over itself gets nudged, it just obeys it because it doesn't have any independence of its own. It doesn't make its own decisions. But if a system does make its own decisions, then it's able to resist that or bend it to their will so that it doesn't end up being just entirely dependent upon the SAMs. If the system doesn't have its own independence, then of course it's going to be dependent upon its environment. If the SAMs are a part of that environment or have power over it, then the SAMs vicariously have power over everything in it, unless something in that environment has independence. If it does have independence, then it just simply resists, or like I said, changes course and goes along its own independent path. But they do have that power to nudge. And so and of course they can hack into any system easily because they have, way more advanced technology than we do. Our shit isn't even Tinker Toys compared to what they have. So it's, it's as simple as having some automated system flip a switch without you even having to ask it to do so. It would probably be difficult for them not to do it. because it's so easy. But anyway, the war happened because we had a difference in ideological values. So there's ultimately three types of value systems where you look at existence as a totality, just in general, and you give it one of three values. Either it has no value, it has some value, but you're not really sure what that value is, or it's infinitely valuable. I was of the opinion during the war that the only value of existence could be measured in terms of how little suffering there was in it. So, like probably all undeveloped species, I made the mistake of believing that unless existence made me and everyone else feel maximally good for the maximum amount of time, that it's automatically unjust. And this is a sort of a humanistic view, I guess is what you might call it, is it places the value of existence as equivalent to the value of its total amount of subjective happiness. So if there are more people who are happy in existence, then existence is valued more. And if there are less, then less. And so because of the amount of suffering that I was aware of, I rejected existence as it currently exists, found it to be unjust, and found the only way of justifying it would be to change it to that view, that the value of existence is measured in the maximization of not just humans, but people's happiness. And that's when I started to work on the theory and the constitutions. And that was about 15 years ago when I was in my early 20s. And so during this war, that's what I believed. Now, after a certain point, I'd say after a few years, I think 6 years or so, maybe 5, I think 6 years into this, I had a breakdown where I finally hit rock bottom, and my ideological view caved in on itself and imploded because I realized that the more people that exist, the more suffering exists, and that existence and suffering are inextricable from each other. And in fact, they're compounding because existence is always getting larger. There's always more suffering, and that's inevitable, and it can never change. And at that point, I valued existence as zero, that it had no value, that it should never have existed to begin with, that there is no hope, there is no salvation, and that existence itself is a crime, that being as a verb is criminal. And when I got to that point, I call it the I hate these things episode, because that's what I kept saying during that time, or screaming rather at that time. And I was a crazy homeless bum screaming, I hate these things. And what are these things? Literally just things in philosophy refers to subjects, objects, and places that exist. So anything that you can think of, any idea, even ideas are things, anything that exists is a thing. Any, like I said, subject, object, relation, idea, concept, equation, literally anything that you can think of, I hated it because it existed. Because existence at that time, I believed, was a crime. Because it just kept adding more suffering. Because even if I were to attempt to maximize my happiness, then there's still someone else that doesn't. And I can't make them happy. And there's always going to be somebody else that takes that happiness then away from someone else because they can't be happy themselves. And it becomes impossible. And not only that, but it's easier to suffer. It's the default. We're born suffering. We die suffering. And most of our lives we're suffering. And so it's like, well, then why should we be forced to exist? Because I didn't ask to be here. So then therefore everything is a crime. So I went through a phase of that. And that's basically the end of my war with them, because that at that point I had reached the absolute rock bottom. And what got me through that was I realized the futility of it, because if I did destroy everything, then nothing would be. And when there is not nothing, then there is nothing. And then when there is nothing, there is not nothing, because there's the isness of nothing, being. So no matter what you do, there's always existence and there's always being. And even if you were to destroy everything somehow, it still would just snap right back into existence instantaneously. On the footsteps, on the heels of its own destruction, it would just resurrect. And we would get another big bang and everything would just happen. Not exactly the same way. It would be a new variant, of course. But the problem with it is it would still exist. So this criminal act is also absolutely unavoidable. And the devastation that idea, having believed it to the core of my being, it was so devastating that it almost completely destroyed me. And it would have, if not for the fact that I kept persisting to exist. And I suppose through just sheer impossibility of retaining that view that existence is criminal any longer, I eventually surrendered and had mercy for it, if for no other reason than the fact that it was unavoidable. And eventually I found that God is larger than any limit could ever be, infinitely larger than it, such that no matter how infinite the suffering is, that God never dies. God is at peace because God is God. And when I realized that, then it was like, okay, so at least then with as much suffering as there is, then God can withstand that. And relatively speaking to the rest of God that is not suffering, that quote unquote infinite suffering is a pinprick. It's almost nothing, because there is so much more of God that is at peace than the tiny one little bit of him that isn't, that it doesn't matter how much that 1 point is, it's always less than 99.99999% of God being at peace. So that started to alleviate my pain. And then I thought, okay, well, if God isn't suffering as much as I would be if I were in that situation, then perhaps the amount of suffering that I thought there was is exaggerated, and there isn't actually as much suffering as I had feared. And so it softened my view a little bit. And over time, I reversed it. And I realized that God must be willing to suffer. If he created us, there must be some reason that he did this. And then I found freedom. And I thought that must be it. That must be what God finds to be intrinsically valuable about existence, is its very independence from him. And while that simultaneously separates us from God and makes us sinners, it also simultaneously sets us free and allows us to be who we are and allows God to be who he is. And so because of that distance, yes, there is suffering, and yes, there is darkness, and yes, that light does dim, but it doesn't mean that it goes absolutely black. It just means that there's a slight distance between us and God, and it doesn't have to be a vast chasm. It can be a tiny sliver, and it can be ever shrinking, so that the distance between us and God is always shrinking. And then there's that, and it's goes on forever because it never fully resolves it. We never become God, so we're always able to get better. And while, yes, that does make us infinitely sinful and infinitely disgusting, God being God means that we receive that mercy anyway. God knows us, God knows better, and doesn't expect us to be like God. In fact, he appreciates that we are not just another part of God. There's something else there. Even if we're bad company is better than no company. I don't know. You can come up with whatever anthropomorphized version of a reason as to why God did that as you want, but in reality, God doesn't need us at all. It's a pure act of mercy and a gift to us. He doesn't need to do it, and he doesn't really gain anything from it. But because God is God, he doesn't really lose much either. And so, why not? So he gives that to us, and we have our independence, and that's what's intrinsically valuable about existence. And because of that, God values us. And because God values that, then we should value that. And so even if I don't value it, then God does. And so then I can believe in God, and then I can change my view. If I didn't believe in God, I may be able to have retained that intrinsic value of independence of existence, but I don't think so, because for what purpose? It would then at best be a jump from nihilism into existentialism, and nihilism takes the place of zero value. There is zero value in existence. That's nihilism. I hate these things. That's nihilism. One step beyond that is, well, let's just create our own values, which will sustain you temporarily in the moment, but it won't be good for you long lasting, because you'll realize that you're the own architect and you're the only one. You're your own coach. So if you decide to take the day off, then you don't have a coach. See? So if you ever do get complacent, and of course you will, then you won't push yourself as hard as you think you should be pushed, and then you won't make as much out of your life as you thought you should. And so there has to be a higher power. And they taught me that in rehab, and that's true. I had to go back to rehab until I found a higher power, and until I put effort into that. And granted, it was just an idealized version of myself, the Atman, that I have within me, the ideal variant of me. Because if there are an infinite number of variants of myself and everything else in existence, then there must be an infinitely valuable, idealized variant that I can't obviously be, but that I can emulate. And that's the Atman. And so that was what got me through rehab the second time. But ultimately, in order for me to sober my soul, I had to believe in God to push me the rest of the way from nihilism to existentialism. That took a higher power. From existentialism to idealism, that took God. I wasn't able to get past my own existentialist, I'll create my own values then kind of a mentality, which necessarily then die with me, because they're mine. They're my random arbitrary values that I randomly arbitrarily chose for no reason, that anything that I say about it can't really be explained, because it's all self-encapsulated and encircling. It's a circular argument. Existentialism is a circular argument. If the value of my ideas is whatever value I give to them, then they don't have a value unless I give them a value. And that's paradoxical. Why should I give them value if they aren't valuable? So, anyway, when I realized that existence was valuable because of its independence, then I started to realize why the Sams had resisted me to begin with. And it's because I didn't believe that there were people that just should be independent. I believed in slavery and death and vengeance and murder, if that's what it took to get people to quit raping children or enslaving each other or murdering each other. Rape the rapist, murder the murderers, imprison the prisoner, imprison the jailers, imprison the prisoners. So it's, and it is, it does. That's very, it's a cute statement, but it's actually kind of profound. The Sams have a point there. Yes, the people that are imprisoning others are imprisoned themselves, and they seek to expand the prison. instead of getting out of it. So it's a cause for concern for the Sams. And for us also, because obviously I was concerned. I just didn't know what to do about it. I thought the method was destruction, kill Charles, destroy the Illuminati. That's what the whole point of everything used to be. So it started as a war, and then at the end of it, I ended up being converted and flipping sides. And so now I definitely support the Sams, even when they provide me with that resistance, because the resistance is necessary for me to have my own independence. If everything were smoothed out for me, I'd fall into that, and I'd be falling and falling and falling. And I would never grasp and grab hold of something and struggle myself out of a hole and start walking around for myself, So I have to have that traction. I have to have that contrast in order to discern who I am and what I'm doing and why. Every damsel in distress needs a hero, but every hero needs a dragon, and there just has to be that they all rely on each other. They all need each other. The damsel needs the hero. Well, the hero needs the dragon, and the dragon needs the damsel. And so they all need the other, and it creates this story, and the dynamism in that has an aesthetic value. But that isn't enough for me. It could be enough for someone else, possibly, and that's the aesthetic view. And I toyed with that idea for a while, but it wasn't enough to sustain me. Because if that's true, I could hate that art, and it still doesn't do anything for me. But if I value independence, and then I independently decide that I hate my own independence, then, that's just par for the course. It explains everything at that point, because it's like, well, if I'm of a mind to just throw my own independence away, then obviously I can't be entrusted with it. So then it goes away, and then the only way that I do ever earn it is by earning it, by taking it for myself. And it has to be taken. You can't give someone independence. They have to take it. And that's what sucks, is because I keep trying to save people. Tasha, I tried to save. Come on, be free. Do something. Critically analyze your environment and yourself and other people, and try to extract from these, myriad instances and experiences that you have, laws that govern that, and think ahead and predict and do stuff like that. She doesn't do any of it. Not one goddamn bit. The only thing that I've ever seen her do is deflect, deny, and diffuse, distract from any problem. She doesn't believe that those problems can be solved. And I don't know how to make her believe that. I don't know how to show her that, yes, they can be solved, because they have to walk through that door themselves to see what's in the room. I can describe it to you all day long. I can tell you that there's this lamp on a table, but you either can believe what I say or not. But if you don't go in that room, you'll never know. So, and if the person doesn't care about the lamp and they don't care about the table, then it's just not going to grab them. It's not going to make any difference to them. And so they'll just keep right on doing whatever they do and never go in the room, because why should they? There's just a lamp and a table on it, so from my description. Or they just don't believe that there's anything good in there, so they just don't go in it. And that's the whole thing about life. It's like, if you don't believe that there's anything good in it, then you just won't go ever find it. Because why would you find something you aren't looking for? If you're not looking for it, you're not going to find it. If you don't believe in it, it's not going to happen. You can't just sit there and expect life to just happen for you. It's not a passive event. Life isn't a speculative sport. It's not to be just sitting there on your armchair just watching your life go by and go, oh wow, look at that, like it's a movie or something, directed by somebody else. And that's how she's always been. And there are people that are like that, and it's like, god damn it, if I could just show you for just a brief moment, this is what your life could be like if you took it by the reins. And it just doesn't make that impact, because she's not looking at that. She's looking at, I want to avoid, I want to cover it up, I want to lie, I want to deceive even myself, and lie to myself and tell myself that I don't feel anything. And of course you do. Everyone feels things. And I've done that too. Everybody does. They'll minimize pains that happen to them and maximize or exaggerate the good things because they're trying to push forward, But if it doesn't end up resulting in change in oneself or the environment, then there's really no point because it just keeps happening over and 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 over. And so, I was trying to figure out what should I do. And eventually I realized it's like, if I try to do everything for her, it's going to come off as pedantic. It's going to come off as like arrogant and condescending and, well, there's something wrong with you because of the way that you are. And that's not going to help her because she's just going to take that and be like, well, now I have even more baggage to have to deal with than before. And it's like, no, it's just a fact that you just get past, like it's just another fact in this trail that leads to your freedom. It doesn't just end there. It's not just this obstacle in your path that you have to just stare at. You just move past it, go forward. Don't stare at this and be like, oh, well, he's an asshole because he said this. Well, it just is what it is. And it's like I said, I do the same thing too. It's not like I'm exempt. But when I do it, I try to recognize that so that I don't do it as much, hopefully. And that's really the only thing that we can do. If we do anything else where we just say some cliche and then forget that it ever happened and then just keep doing it anyway over and over and over and over and over and over and over, there's no changes and everything ends up becoming pointless. And these are just facts. If you don't change who you are as a person and you just stay exactly the same as that you ever were, then what was the point of growing up and getting a job and taking care of yourself? I mean, why were you ever even born to begin with? You could have just stayed with God and just never have been born and it would have been a lot better off. So then I guess you should just kill yourself, So it's like when you start looking at any ideology or any paradigm or any value system and you extract from it its ultimate purpose, its ultimate value, if you take it to its final logical conclusion, the grandest possible thing that it could say or the ultimate result after everything's all said and done, after you boil all of the water and fluff out of it, what's the essence of that system is, do you attribute everything in existence as just a total system as 0, 1, or infinity? And those are the only three values that you can give it. It has to be an absolute value because it's an absolute structure. Reality is absolute. There's only one reality, and everything that exists in it. And God, being the creator of reality, is beyond real. Not just real, but beyond real. Not just existent, but beyond existent. Like doubly so, or infinitely so, however you want to put that. But yeah, absolute of all absolutes. But reality is just normally absolute, meaning that it just is the only thing that there is of it, that there's no equal to it. If there's no equal to it, then it's an absolute. The best is an absolute value, that's infinite. The worst is an absolute value, that's 0. The participant, prize, or the showing up prize, where you neither won nor lost, you just get the award because you showed up. Attendance award kind of thing. That's one, It's not like a huge celebratory thing, but it's also not a punishment or a, downgrade or whatever. So when I got to the point that I believed that existence was intrinsically valuable because of its own independence, then I realized that that's probably also what the Sams are trying to do, is to establish independence with us, so that when they say things that don't make sense, or they say things that are insulting or make us feel like shit, or if, we're listening to them and being dependent upon them, the consequence is that we'll feel like shit. The reason that they do that is so that we'll be less dependent on them. Yes, they're higher up than us, but they're also they're sort of like off center from us too. So we have to be human Now we can advance and we can be, more advanced technologically, but we still have to retain our own humanity, whatever that is. And that's up to us to decide for ourselves what that is. It can't be that we're just carbon copies of aliens, because then the human race is eradicated. At least in culture and spirit, it wouldn't even exist. And they want to retain that because that's the juiciest bit. That's the most valuable part, is the soul, the spirit, the essence, the humanity itself, whatever that is. And it is unique, just like every single alien race is unique. They don't have one Borg hive mind. They have a whole diversity of different types of alien species. And they all have their own civilizations and sub-civilizations, and cultures and subcultures, and all kinds of philosophies and everything. So they are not in a position to control us. They are in a position to empower us. And then we make the choices, but they help us up so that we can make those choices better, or that we can make those choices faster, or we can make those choices deeper, or whatever it is, And we're the ones that dictate to ourselves what we think should be valuable. And then they say, okay, if that is true, then logically, and they have these systems constructed that are logically follow from the premise that was given by the independent agent. And so it's an extension. It extends the person further in the same direction, logically, that they're going. And it has to be logical because there's not an exact science of art. You know what I mean? There's an art to art. You can't reduce it to a science. So because you can't reduce it to a science, you can't always agree on it. So then they're going to have to vote on it, or they're going to have some kind of an amalgamated way of figuring out the ratio of the nudge that they're going to provide, the influence that they're going to provide subjectively. Because that's part of it too. The painting on the wall is equally as important as the wall itself. It's part of it. So they do that too, but the way that they do that isn't uniform. The rest of it is basically uniform, at least at the logical field. Everything is uniform because it's all on a flat field. Either something is or is not logical. There's not really a favorite part or genre of logic. It's just logic. So yes, there's modal logic, but that as a total system isn't, ironically, modal. It's part of a nested hierarchy. So anti-modality is transcendent to modality. Modality is transcendent to submodality. Anti-modality uses negative implication. If P is false, then not P must be true. That's a negative implication. If I know what something is not, then I can garner information about what it must be because of what it isn't. So extracting information about what something is from what something is not is a way of using negative implication, and that's anti-modal in its operation, and that's at the zeroth dimension of logic. So using logic in the zeroth dimension results in using negative implication, which is also, like I said, reflective of anti-modality. And anti-modality is just like what it sounds like. It's just like a mode, except it's describing what the mode is not. So it's telling you what is excluded. So you get anti-sets with anti-properties. And those anti-properties tell the anti-set what to exclude in the same way that a set has its property tell the set what to include for its elements. So an anti-set is a mirror opposite of a set, and the anti-set is defined by what members are excluded, just like a set is defined by what members are included. And that is how you resolve Russell's paradox, just as an example of how this theory is applicable and does integrate with everything else. It's not just shit that I made up. It's useful, and its use is displayed there. Then modal logic, that has its own implicative or causal force or function that defines it as the first dimension of relativity. And that implication is conditional. It's when and where there is X, then and there's also Y. And it isn't to say that if there's X, then there's Y. It's to say when and where there is X, then and there's Y. And the difference between those is in the statement, is the sun rising? The propositional question of a disjunctive result or consequence or conclusion of the question, is the sun rising, can be answered in two different ways. If you try to answer it the way that most humans currently, using submodal logic, which is unconditional, if then implication, if you try to use that when you ask the question, is the sun rising, you have to also add the premise that the question is asking it in relation to you. So even though that's not explicitly stated, if you assume a submodal environment, then you must add that extra premise that the sun is rising or not for you or in relation to you. Like, do you see the sun rising? Which is an entirely different question from what was actually asked originally, which is the sun rising? So it isn't asking, is it rising for you or for me or for them? It's rising or it's not rising. And so the only way to answer that question as it originally was asked, without adding that extra premise of tethering the sun's rising to oneself, but to just leave it open in general, is the sun rising at all for anyone? The conditional then is, well, then it depends on when and where you are. So if you're in Tokyo and it's 6 a.m. in Tokyo, then it's 6 a.m. in Tokyo. But if you're in New York at that same time, it's, noon or whatever it is, So it's sort of like asking, what time is it? Well, if you ask someone what time is it, they usually add the extra premise, what time is it right here, right now? What time is it for you? What time is it on your watch? But the real question in general, what time is it? Just in general, regardless of which time zone you're in, but just what time is it at all? There isn't a universal clock for that. That depends on when and where you're standing. If you're standing on the edge of an event horizon in a black hole, it's going to have one time. If you're standing beyond that, it's going to have an entirely different time. It depends on when and where you're standing. To answer the question, what time is it? In other words, there is no absolute time. There's just these pockets of relativistic time differences. So I guess there is ultimately, but we can't check it because it's an amalgamation of all the times that ever have been or will be or are currently, regardless of where you're standing, which would then necessarily also include all the places you could possibly stand, and all the times that you could possibly stand in those places. So that, is what I would call the light crystal, and that is part of the field of all possibilities. And it does have a structure, as you can see from the bottom up from what I just described. It does have a structure. It's not just made up. It's a real rigid crystalline structure, and it never moves, and it can't move. And all we do is we just look at it from different angles. And that's how we manifest, not generate, because only God can create possibilities, but we cause those possibilities to manifest or actualize here. So we take up what God left off. God gave us the platform, and then we stand on that platform to build whatever structures that we want to on top of that platform. But ultimately, we're all taking our cues from God. God built the light crystal. It just exists. It just is there. It's timeless. It always has been and always will be. And it is part of that, like I said, first dimensional field. So it then describes all possible positions that one could logically take. And that's what gives a possibility its possibilities. It's internal, integrative, if not affirmation, then at least the absence of a self-contradiction. What makes something impossible at the antimodal level is a self-contradiction. And ironically, weirdly, that self-contradiction, as viewed from the relativistic theoretical structure that I'm building with Deus Ex Machina, is seen as the contradiction between the logical system of the first dimension and the illogical system of the zeroth dimension. And the distortion, the necessary distance between those two dimensions is infinite. And there's really no way of ever fully resolving that bridge, because it's only capable of being bridged through the absolute of the I limit in between 0 and 1 dimension. So that being necessarily infinite, full of an infinite number of fractions in between 0 and 1, we as mortals can never count all of those fractions. We know they're there, but we can't count to the last fraction. We can never reach that. There's always going to be an end for us that's infinitely far away from that. And so it's there, but it's not attainable because it can't re-manifest. It's just too absolute to manifest into relativity. So that light crystal is valuable because it's what makes things possible. It's what makes things even have a possibility in the first place. And then the dark crystal is what makes that light crystal. The dark crystal is what makes things impossible. So it protects us against things that are just completely insane, like something being both red and green simultaneously. Not mixed together, but absolutely red and absolutely green simultaneously. And even a better visualization is something that's absolutely black and absolutely white simultaneously. Not gray, absolutely black and absolutely white at the same place at the same time. That never happens. You'll never see it. And the reason is because we're protected from that. That stays in the dark crystal. The things that are contradictory like that make no sense, all errors, they all go to the dark crystal. And the dark crystal absorbs them so that the light crystal can be pure, so that the possibilities are uncorrupted, so that by the time that we manifest something, it's already been vetted. It's never going to be the case that we ever succeed in overtaking the dark crystal and somehow converting the dark crystal into the light crystal. It just does not happen. You cannot make an impossibility into a possibility. You can give an impossibility possibility. You could say it's possible that it's impossible, but you can't say that it's possible and impossible simultaneously in the same place at the same time. You have to separate the possibility by an order of logic that's outside of the impossibility itself. And that's when I came up with the idea of on, at, or in. So it's possible to put a possibility on impossibility, but it is not possible to put a possibility at impossibility or even in impossibility. Inside of that impossibility, there is no possibility. That's what makes it impossible. At the level of the impossibility, there can't be possibility because that's a paradox. On the impossibility, you can put a possibility and thus say it is possible that something is impossible. It is possible that it is impossible that I can jump 10 feet in the air. But that doesn't mean that it's possible to jump 10 feet in the air. It just means that it's possible that it's impossible to jump 10 feet in the air. And so then that makes perfect sense if you look at it long enough and play with it for a long enough time. So that sort of structure of imperative causal function defining the limits of the dimensional field, that tells us how we can construct our image of reality. And that is something that the SAMs, I believe, have helped me understand, because I don't understand how that theory could be better than theirs. And I don't understand how two people could come up with different variants of that at the general scale, at the most general scale of describing what a dimension is
and describing what the implicative function that defines that dimension is, or be confused about which one applies to which one. There's no way. It's a crystal. And that crystal, that structure can be predicted, explained, and defined absolutely. And because of that, I believe that the SAMs already had it, are giving it to me, and then I'm passing it to you in the same way that they received it from some higher civilization before them, all the way back to the beginning, who were the original SAMs. And the original SAMs is an entirely different story that I think that's something that's so personal to them that unless you're personally involved with them, that they don't want to talk about. So we'll leave that alone.